Dr. Tuttle is a renowned master of healing music, and his wife, Madeline, is a visionary artist. They are dedicated to educating people and bringing about world peace. Together, they travel the Americas, Europe, and the world, providing concerts, lectures, and seminars. Dr. Tuttle has a master's degree in humanities from San Francisco State University and a PhD in the philosophy of education from the University of California at Berkeley. My friends, I am deeply honored to present the author of the most important book of our time, Dr. Will Tuttle.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Let's just give a hand to everyone who helped make this evening possible. I know a lot of people are very hard. Thank you. All right, well, I want to thank all of you for joining us here this evening. I'd like to share with you some of the main ideas from the book that Shirley was just mentioning that I wrote pretty recently, The World Peace Diet. How many of you feel that you have a pretty good understanding of what animals endure for food in this country? How many of you don't want to hear anything about it? Don't want to know. I won't actually be talking about the the gory details of what animals go through. I think we all know that it's a very abysmal life. To be born into a body of a pig or a cow or a chicken or a turkey on one of today's factory farms is nothing we would want to contemplate. What I'd like to do is really just raise some questions and maybe tell you a little bit about the main ideas in the book and my own story of how I came up with these ideas. Because I think it's really important that each one of us, in our own way, makes connections that allow us to live with more awareness, with more understanding and wisdom on this planet. So I just love you for being here this evening to address these, I think, really pressing issues that probably, in many ways, because of a variety of reasons, it's probably the most taboo subject, actually, we can talk about in this particular culture. The main idea in the book is that the eating of animals, or viewing animals as food, as commodities to be eaten, is the living core of our culture. It's the very fundamental essence. If you just go to the core of our culture and what and how our culture sort of manifests out of that, we find this, and yet it's totally invisible. No one would ever expect it or suspect it. We think food is just something we eat while we're watching TV. It's no big deal. But actually, it's a very, very big deal. So I'd like to just talk a little bit. Can you hear me okay as far as the volume goes? About the main ideas in the book and how I came with some of these ideas. I was born in a pretty typical family in New England, Concord, Massachusetts, eating lots and lots of meat, dairy, and eggs. And I was told from the time I can remember that that's what you eat, and if you didn't eat it, you would die from a lack of protein. So I never questioned it. And I remember at one point, I think maybe I was in about second grade, I remember my mother told me that there are vegetarians, but I certainly never saw one. She said it like they're on some faraway planet, vegetarian, but they don't eat, they just eat vegetables, I guess. So, and I didn't like vegetables, so I didn't think that would be the greatest thing. I like some vegetables, but I think the way my mother prepared them, I guess. But anyway, I grew up. It was very interesting being born and raised in Concord, Massachusetts, because Concord was really the home of two revolutions. The first revolution, as we all know, it's actually right about now, April 19th. Every April 19th, we would go down to the Old North Bridge in Concord. My father would dress up like a Minuteman, and we would fight against the Redcoats, the British, and we'd chase them away from the bridge and back to Boston. And we celebrated the beginning of the Revolutionary War in 1775. And so I grew up with this idea, really, that revolution is a good thing. You know, revolution is something that is healthy. You know, it kind of, when the circumstances become oppressive, then it's good to have a change. And then later, in Concord in the mid-1800s, there was what is called the Transcendentalist Revolution. And that was really a very powerful change. And I grew up learning to swim in Walden Pond. I was born in Emerson Hospital and went to the Alcott School. These are kind of well-known philosophers and writers and poets of Concord. And the interesting thing there is that they were the first ones to bring into this country, back in the mid-19th century, ideas from Asia. You know, the Buddhist, Taoist, Hindu, or Vedanta teachings. They were very excited about these, and one of the main teachings is the teaching of ahimsa, which means nonviolence. And so they began to read about this and make connections to, as Shirley mentioned, Pythagoras, Plato, Plotinus, some of the Christian mystics of the earlier times, who also lived lives that tried to reduce suffering to other living beings for spiritual reasons. And they began practicing vegetarianism. In fact, Bronson Alcott, you all remember Little Women and Louisa May Alcott? Well, he was the father. Very interesting. We went and visited there a few times. This commune that he started with some money from Emerson. They bought some land, and it was called Fruitlands. And they were living there in what we would call today a totally vegan lifestyle. They would eat no flesh of any animals, no dairy products, no eggs, no wool. They wouldn't even wear any cotton because in 1850, cotton came from slaves in the South, and they didn't want to support that. So they were walking around through the snowdrifts in Concord in January in shoes made out of linen, you can imagine. So these are like hardcore vegans back then. And I, of course, was totally unaware of this as a kid growing up, but I think somehow maybe as I wandered through the hills and dales of Concord, maybe some of this kind of seeped into me on some level. But I really wasn't conscious of it, but what I remember very clearly was that when I was 12 years old, I went to a camp in Vermont, and it was this like ultimate beautiful Vermont landscape. It was a camp called Camp Challenge, where they tried to challenge us with living outdoors and hiking, whitewater canoeing, and all that kind of thing. And it was affiliated with this beautiful Vermont dairy farm. You know, like if you think of like when people say, "Oh, I love eating organic cheese and organic milk," it would have come from this type of place. And I mean, actually, it comes from a much worse place, but the very best would have come from this kind of place. So it was a small, what we think of beautiful organic dairy farm. So we were all called down there on one. I remember one July day. We went down to the farm and. We were shown, each one of us were told to get a chicken. So we each got a chicken, and I was shown how you can, if you hold the chicken, you know, with one hand, you hold her down on a board with two nails in it, put her head through the nails, and then with the other hand you have your axe and you cut her head off, and then she'll run around and with no head and spouting blood, and then you can eat her. So that's what we did. We all did that. We learned how to do that, and I really have to say, honestly, I didn't question it. It didn't really faze me that much because I was, 12 years old. I was kind of a tough young kid, and I knew you had to eat meat or you would die of lack of protein. And the animals don't have a soul, and God put them here for us to use, and that was the end of the story. So we had to do what you had to do. And so, but then a few weeks later, we were brought down to the farm again to the dairy, and this time there was a cow singled out. And she wasn't looking very comfortable all by herself in the middle of this barn on the wooden floor. And the owner of the camp was someone we admired enormously. His name was Tom. He was this rugged outdoor guy. He owned the dairy and everything. And he told us that she wasn't getting enough milk, so she would be used for meat. As we were talking about that today, that in the Heifer Project, they say that animals are good for the 4 M's. That's what they're used for. They're used for meat, milk, manure, and money. So she was going to be used now for meat. And so we kind of, I won't go into the whole thing, but basically we gathered around her, and he taught us, he showed us how to, if you take a rifle and you hit her just in the right spot behind the ear, then that'll just, that'll do the trick. So he had a couple of the older campers shoot, and she took the bullets right in the head, nothing happened. And then finally, then he took the gun and he shot the gun, and I guess he hit the right place, because when that happened, she just dropped. And it was a crash. I mean, a cow was, weighs over 1,000 pounds, and she was close by. And everything released, all the feces and urine came pouring out, and he just then jumped astride this animal with this long knife, and with a strong stroke, he just cut her head right off, and with one big stroke. And when he did that, the blood went in these long arcs. I can still see it, through the air and pulsing out of her open neck. And I was shocked. I mean, I was just 12 years old. I never had seen such a thing. And he then calmly kind of wiped his brow and explained to us very matter-of-factly that you have to do that because to get the blood out of the meat, because he told us that we humans, we don't like meat if it's bloody. If it's soaked in blood, it's like ruin. It's no good. So you gotta have the cow actually alive and her heart beating to pump the blood out of the body. And that's actually, later I discovered in my research into the slaughterhouse abuses that animals endure, that's really the primary reason that animals suffer so extremely in slaughterhouses very often, is because of that basic thing, is that humans don't like bloody meat. So you can't just kill them and then cut them up after they're dead. They have to be alive when those arteries are cut, so they literally die from bleeding to death, and that's, as you know, very often the skin and so forth while they're still conscious. So all of this, I suddenly saw, but it was still, I was still so totally indoctrinated that it's just like not an option. This is not a cow. This is hamburger. And what I remember is that we did, eat that eater for a few weeks, and I did go back to this camp one more year, the following year, second time. And what was really interesting, and I think it's very germane to this whole process that I went through, is that we basically went down again on a beautiful July afternoon, and there was again a cow singled out who wasn't giving enough milk. And this time, though, Tom said, we're not going to do it in the barn. I mean, I remember it made a big mess on the wooden floor of the barn. So he said, we'll bring her up to this grassy knoll. And so it was kind of comical, really, to see it. I mean, we had like 40 young, strong little kids from age maybe 8 to 16 with a rope around this cow's neck, and we were going to bring her up there. So we were all pulling on this rope, and we couldn't budge her an inch. She was like, knew whatever it was we had planned for her, she wanted no part of it. And it's so funny to hear how slaughterhouse workers say, oh, these animals are so stupid. They don't do what you want them to do. They're just dumb animals. Well, they're not that dumb. I mean, I think they know exactly what, and they resist as much as they can. And she was absolutely resisting, because I think she knew intuitively that this meat meant her no good. So Tom said, okay, well, this is no problem. He got a heavy chain, put it around her neck, attached it to the bumper of this four-wheel drive pickup truck, and just started going. And she couldn't resist. She's like, getting pulled along. And so I remember I was riding the back of the pickup truck, and we were all kind of running along behind, going up to this grassy knoll. And we got almost up there, and I was looking back, I was just watching, and I was seeing her getting pulled up like this. And then a miracle happened. She broke the chain. The chain just snapped. And it was a heavy chain. She was resisting so strongly, and so the truck just lurched forward. We all fell down, got back up, looked down, and I saw this cow standing there, looking up at us with her head cocked to the side with this chain dangling down from her neck. And she wasn't saying anything audibly, but she was speaking so powerfully. Don't do this, please, don't do this. And she was pleading, and I heard her plea, really, in my heart. And something shifted. I think when that chain snapped, something snapped way down in here. And it's still, when I hear about dairy cows, and people say, oh, it's all organic or something, I still go, yeah, like that, right there, what they do. And I think something snapped, and I saw her, instead of just as me, I saw her as a being, as a mother, as a being who wanted to live. And I just yearned, there must be some other way, but I still had never been told that there's any other way. You have to, you'll die if you don't eat this, or you've got to eat this meat, you'll die. So, I don't remember what happened, but I know we did get her up there, we did kill her, we did eat her. And I went away to college a few years later, in Colby College in Maine. And I began at that point, in my late teens, early 20s, to really read about Eastern religion, some Zen, and other things in Jesus' teachings. And I started hearing more about vegetarians. I still never met one, but I started hearing, I know they're around here somewhere, and I really started hearing about them. This was back in 1975 in Maine. I mean, it's like, 1972 or 3 years. But anyway, by the time I got to my senior year, near the end of college, I really felt this inner yearning. Joseph Campbell talked about a midlife crisis. I felt like I had this early midlife crisis. I didn't want to go into the business world. I really wanted to go on a spiritual journey of some kind. I have a brother 2 years younger than me named Ed, and I talked to him about we're here on this planet to attain a higher consciousness. We're not here just to accumulate things and try to compete with the limited resources. I mean, what a suffering all that is, and we just didn't want any part of it. So we decided to go somewhere where we could evolve to a higher consciousness, and we didn't know where that was. So we thought, well, let's go to California. And we got California, we got higher consciousness. This was back in 1975. By then, it was 75. So we left home. We left my mother and father, and we went out on the road, and I remember I had a little backpack with a few things and some French cookies, and we just left, and we walked and hitchhiked and so forth, and we got about as far as Buffalo, New York after about a month. And when we got to Buffalo, we just decided we would head south. And so, because it was, it was getting cold, and I had a bachelor's degree, I could figure that out. Okay, it's October, you head south. So we were heading south, and we walked, and we were just meditating, doing a lot of this questioning of who am I, and meditating and so forth. And more I began to get sensitive to myself and to the world, and it's very interesting. We had no money. We were very vulnerable, really, out here. I remember at one point we had no food. This really nice fellow said we could stay at this little cabin, and there was no food there, but he had fishing poles, and it was by a stream. And I went to Camp Challenge. I knew how to fish, so I went out and I caught a couple of fish and brought them back to the cabin. And then I had this like a little rain jacket, and I put them in the pocket, and I thought, within 20 minutes they would be dead. Well, they weren't dead. They were still alive, and they were in the kitchen alive. And there I was. So I had to kill them. And I remember this feeling, I was just meditating and trying to develop this compassion and peace within myself. And then I had this fish, and I just like slammed it on the ground. So I had to kill this fish before I could cut it open and eat. Or him, I should say. And so finally, I was able to kill the fish, and we ate the fish. But I just again was saying, there's got to be a better way. This just doesn't feel right, to be working in this way to purify and develop myself, and yet causing violence to these creatures, and not only causing violence, but kind of deceiving them with lures and all this stuff. So we walked south. We walked down through upstate New York, across Pennsylvania, over many months into West Virginia, and finally into Kentucky, and then finally into Tennessee. And we walked all the way to a place called the Farm. And some of you, has anyone heard of the Farm? The Farm in Tennessee at that time, 1975, had about 800 people. It was the largest hippie commune, I guess you'd say, in the world, long-haired commune in the world. About I could say about 800 people, and they were all from California mostly, so we got our wish. And they were all vegan. It was very interesting. It was a vegan community. And they were living, and vegan, by the way, I should talk about this a little bit, but it was very powerful. It was to be with people who ate no animal products, who wore no leather. I mean, it was really amazing. They told us how chickens are, debeaked and crammed into these little cages for eggs, and how pigs are castrated without anesthesia, and how cows have their babies stolen from them, and then we take their milk, and then they were eating, and then they were just demonstrating these wonderful vegan meals. They had the first I think one of the first soy ice cream places, they invented their own soy ice cream, and it has soy dairy, and they grew a lot of their own food there. And so it was really inspiring to see they're really strong and healthy and on a mission to make world peace and build a better world. And so that was it. I mean, I stopped eating meat and never have since. And I remember taking along with one of these guys, and he said, "Yep, I'm wearing vegetarian shoes." And I thought, wow, even have vegetarian shoes. I was like, everything was just clicking, And so we didn't feel like really staying there, but to me, one of the big lessons, because we stayed there maybe about almost a month, is the power of community. Being in a community, it was so great to see these kids. They were just born and raised as vegans. All the kids were like maybe, 100 kids in the school. It was a totally vegan school. And it was just so natural and so easy for everyone because they believed in this deeply, that we want to create a culture based on nonviolence. And we eventually went down to Alabama, and I discovered a Zen center in Alabama. We lived there for quite a while. Now, never could have scripted that, can you imagine? But we did. And then from there, eventually, I did get out to California. I lived in different meditation centers, mostly Tibetan Buddhist centers, and eventually went to Korea. I shaved my head and lived as a Zen monk in Korea. And this was the second experience that I had with a community. And this was really different because when I got there at Sangwangsa Zen Temple in the southern part of southwestern part of South Korea was a community that had been vegan for 650 years. It had these deep roots. Nobody didn't even talk about it, but no one, ate any flesh of animals or any dairy products, any eggs. We didn't want any leather or silk or wool. You wouldn't even kill a mosquito, really. It was that kind of a place. We meditated from 3 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night every day, and sitting on the floor just meditating in silence for 90 days. And so it was one of these things where I think when people are really deeply engaged in self-inquiry and self-development, you get very sensitive to violence, and you just, you don't want to, you couldn't eat that kind of food. But for me, it was a very powerful experience. And I had actually, in the time between the farm and going there, I had started eating some dairy products. I really thought it was okay. And most of the meditation places, people ate some dairy products or had some eggs. But a few years before that, maybe in 81 or 82, I started feeling like I shouldn't do that. So by the time I went to Sangwangsa in 84, I was a vegan, and that really, when I came back to this country, I felt like I had really transformed, and like I had these roots that went so deep inside of me. And I think it's nothing strange, actually. It's nothing, and it's certainly nothing to be proud of. I think it's really just having eyes that when we look into the world, we see beings instead of seeing things to be used. That's what it is. That's all veganism is looking with eyes that see beings rather than seeing things that you use, that we are here to be used, instruments or commodities for my use. Rather, I see beings. And I think when each one of us, when we see a being, there's a natural human tendency to protect or care or to feel some empathy. And so we have to disconnect from that. And so when I came back to this culture, I really had a culture shock, and I saw much more clearly how our culture actually operates. And I ended up, getting my PhD at Berkeley, started teaching college, and bringing, it's a great thing, when you're teaching college classes, you can tell the kids, okay, not the kids, but tell the students, now you're going to read Peter Singer's Animal Liberation. So I had some great years doing that. And during that time, and this was in the San Francisco Bay Area, I felt more and more like someone is going to write a book, because there's some good books out on this, not a lot, but it was just starting. This was back in the early 80s. Books that were telling about, like Francis Moore LePay, the environmental connection between eating animal foods, some books on the health connection, and even one or two books on the and the suffering that animals go through. But no one wrote a book that gave the big picture, you know, the whole, like the big picture. And as the years went by, I just thought, gosh, you know, people have to see this bigger picture, not including the psychological and spiritual dimension, the sociological dimension, the anthropology and history and the economics, and as well as these other dimensions. Because it all fits together in an amazing way. And so I met Madeline in 1992 in Switzerland, and I started telling them. I found out actually that she became a vegetarian in November of 1975. So she was in Switzerland, I was at the farm. It happened at exactly the same time. It's an amazing thing. But anyway, I started telling her, you know, someone's going to write that book, and I can't wait to read it. It'll be so interesting. I kept telling her, I know someone's going to write this book. I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing to write such a book. And a few more years went by, and finally I thought, all right, I guess if I'm going to read such a book, I'll have to write it myself. So I spent the next 5 years, literally full-time, writing this book. And it was a great experience to, I think, through the research and through the writing, to deepen within myself the connections, the understanding of the connections and the interconnections in our culture between food, religion, our spiritual, psychological, our whole cultural story, and how, as Shirley said, our yearning, I think, our basic human yearnings for justice and peace and harmony on this planet are so deeply connected to how we treat animals. We are naturally raised in a culture that poo-poos that idea. They say, no, that's nothing. However, it's very powerful. So that's the foundation of the background. And then what I'd like to do now is maybe just talk a little bit about what some of these main ideas actually are in the book, and and then take some questions. You know, if you have any questions as we're going along. First of all, I have to just say the book it's over 300 pages long, and it was actually quite a bit longer before the editor really cut. She said, never repeat anything. You know, just say it once, that's it. So I can't really begin to cover everything that's in the book, but I'll try to just give some of the main, an outline of some of the main ideas. The basic idea, I think, really, is that at the core of our culture, we are, each one of us, really indoctrinated, and that's nothing wrong with that. Every culture, no matter what culture it is, indoctrinates the beings that are born into that culture. We learn their language. You know, their language becomes my language. Their beliefs become my beliefs. Their attitudes become my attitudes. Their food becomes my food. It just happens. So somehow we think, well, we're in America. It's different. We're all free. You know, we just make up our life totally free. But it's not true. I don't think anyone would start drinking the milk of a cow unless they were, you know, you'd never think of that. Go to a cow and get on it, you know, unless you were given that, you know, injected with it really by our culture. So, so we're indoctrinated, and basically the fundamental underlying mentality is the mentality of commodification of beings and oppressing them, exploiting them, as seeing, as I say, seeing them as commodities and as instruments. And really, it's a mentality of exclusion and of privilege. You know, we are humans, they are animals. We exclude them from the sphere of our compassion. They're just pigs. And this isn't something we just teach kind of, you know, in educational theory. There's what is called paradigmatic learning. That's the learning of the paradigm or the underlying pattern of a culture. And so this is something we learn in the very cells of our body. We learn this at a very deep level through our parents. You know, it was so interesting. I was in Switzerland watching some ducks a few years ago, and what it was a mother duck, and she was with her little baby ducklings. And I was watching them, and what I realized was, she's teaching them what to eat and what not to eat, how to feed, how to find food. And I realized at that moment, somehow, I just realized that is the most important thing that any parents of any species teach their young, is what is food and how to eat. And so when we're taught that by our culture on a very deep, almost like cellular level, we take it very seriously. You know, if my daddy's barbecues and my mom's chicken, it's food. I mean, you don't question that. So if I come along as a vegan and I start questioning it, people kind of go, like, what are you doing? Questioning, this deep thing. So it takes, I think it's important to understand the power of this. And, but anyway, we're indoctrinated to see beings as things, and really to believe that we are predatory by nature, that we're essentially predatory, because we eat like predators. And so it's so interesting to see, for example, just go to the grocery store in the baby food section and just look what's in these cute little bottles, these little that little kids get after they lose their mother's breast. Then we all get little bottles full of veal. It's very interesting. Veal, baby cows by babies, or chicken, and turkey, and beef, and macaroni, cheese, and all these things. And so we just brought right into that. And by the time we begin to understand what they are, it's too late. So what is being taught here? What is being taught is we're being taught to disconnect. This is really what's taught at a very deep level. To disconnect the reality that's on our plate from the reality that it took to get it on our plate. But we don't really make that connection. It's very hard to make that connection. And so we practice in our culture the art of disconnecting. We don't really think about when we have a piece of chicken or a hot dog or a hamburger or some ham or whatever, eggs. We don't kind of meditate and feel into and connect with the reality of that cow or pig or chicken experience. We don't do that in our culture. We really strictly don't do that. We keep the disconnect. And so we practice this disconnecting in our culture at a deep level ritually, because it's 2 or 3 times every day. And so we become masters. There's an old German saying, Übung macht den Meister. Practice makes the master, whatever we practice. So I think for our culture to really awaken, it's really about connecting, making connections. And this is the most powerful thing. The old spiritual teachings of all the traditions say the most important thing we can do is to leave home. That doesn't mean you have to actually leave home. What it means is to question the assumptions of the culture you're born into so you can see them clearly and have more freedom. That's the only way a culture ever makes any progress, is if the inhabitants of the culture question the assumptions of the culture and enact new ideas. So what I realized is that this is such a pervasive attitude that animals are just commodities and that we just use them and that that's okay to do. And when you think about it a little bit, you realize, my gosh, this is amazing. I mean, just in the United States alone, we're per year killing for food 10 billion what we call land animals, mammals or birds, basically. And beyond that, we don't know how many fish because it's just by the pound, But estimates are probably, as far as individuals, maybe 20 to 30 billion a year. So these are enormous numbers, for a population the size of the United States, almost 200 million people, to be killing. It amounts to millions every day, and it's 300 per second. You can kind of figure, land animals. You can picture, maybe a 100-yard football field, and every foot there's an animal. Every second, it's going by and being killed. That's what's happening right now. And so it takes whole armies of people, of our brothers and sisters, to kill that many animals. We're just like stabbing, killing, cutting. And so you realize how naive we are. I mean, how to think that we can sow these seeds of this massive violence, just rivers and oceans of blood and suffering, and that doesn't matter. We can just do it. And we don't see, I think, how not only does it really hurt the animals and cause them so much terror and suffering and misery, but how it hurts us. There's an old teaching, and all the spiritual teachings teach us that when we harm others, we harm ourselves more than we harm them, because we numb ourselves at a deep level ethically in order to harm others willfully. We have to reduce them, and that's really the basic mentality in our culture, is reducing beings to things. And so, and then just and I'm just thinking it doesn't matter. And so for me, it was incredible to realize that I could go through all this schooling. I went through 12 years and whatever, 4 more years and 2 more years for a master's degree, another 3 or 4 years for a PhD, read hundreds, probably, I don't know, thousands of books and in these fields of philosophy, education, politics, economics, and the most progressive people, you know, like we heard this morning, people like Howard Zinn and everybody. None of them, nobody, ever wrote even one sentence, or sure not a paragraph, saying that perhaps the reason we have all the problems that we're having in this culture, and think of those problems, whatever they are: war, terrorism, environmental devastation, the breakdown of the families, social alienation, you know, all these different problems. That it never once did I read something like that the driving force behind these problems could be the mentality required by our meals. The mentality underlying it that's required to have this unending supply of flesh and fluids from brutalized animals. It's like an unthinkable thought. No one could even conceive of it, even to begin to discuss it. You couldn't even say it. And that is the mark of the living core of our culture. It's so powerful that it's invisible. It's undiscussable. It's unthinkable. And yet it's driving us. It's propelling us more strongly than any other force. It's where we really see it. The violence is so massive and it's so hidden. And there's an old saying that what you ignore most forcefully will control you the most. And we very forcefully can ignore this. You just try talking to somebody about, well, you know, what are you eating? Oh, I'm eating some steak. Do you know what that cow, went through? Oh, they'll just change the subject. I don't want to talk about that. So this is the thing. And so what I found, I have a chapter in here near the beginning. I have a couple of chapters that go into how it all happened. It's very interesting, and I kind of like to tell you about it, but it takes a little bit too long. But maybe I'll say just really very briefly. I have a couple of chapters that talk about what happened. Between 8 and 10,000 years ago, there was a revolution in human consciousness, and that was when we began herding animals for food. When that happened, and what I argue in the book is that that was the last revolution in our culture. We've had revolutions since then. We've called them the industrial revolution, the scientific revolution, communications. They're not revolutions because they didn't change anything, really. I mean, it's the same mentality, even worse, even stronger. The mentality that happened in that revolution was that animals were reduced from being mysterious cohabitants of the world with us to being mere property, to being capital. The word capital means head, right? And so when someone owned, so what happened 8 to 10,000 years ago, people started first in the area right now, actually what's now Iraq, to herd. First it was goats, and then sheep, and then a couple thousand years later it was cows. So by the time the historic era emerged, it was 4,000 years ago, with the very first writing. I used to teach all these classes in mythology and everything. You see the very first writings, like in the Old Testament, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Iliad, the Odyssey, the very first writings in the West, you see the system by then is established. You have a wealthy elite, the kings and the lords, and there are just a few of them, and they own capital. Capital means head in Latin. It was livestock, was wealth. In order to the fastest way to get more wealth was to steal somebody else's cattle. then you're much richer. Women, through this, were reduced. We had the first total reduction of animals. Animals became mere, despised. Instead of being, cows were so powerful, and these animals, they became mere property. And there's nothing worse you could call someone than a cow or a pig or a chicken or a tree. They became despised. The other animals were also reduced to being nuisances, pests. Predators like wolves and coyotes. They were also reduced because they might kill our cows. Nature was reduced to mere property that could be fought for over property rights, land for grazing. Women were reduced to chattel property. The first massive human slavery took over, because whatever we do to animals, we start doing to people. That's the thing you have to understand. Whatever we do to animals, we end up doing to people. So we started owning them like property. Pretty soon we're owning women like property. Pretty soon we're owning other humans that we conquer like property. And we have slavery. And so this is the system. The very first word for war on this planet, as far as linguists know, the old Sanskrit word gadya, which literally means the desire for more cattle. That's the very first word for war. So the very first wars that were ever fought on this planet, I mean large scale, what we call wars, were these wealthy kings that had the whole masses under them fighting over land for their cattle, And this system, we think it's still going on today. We have exactly the same thing. We have a wealthy elite, a capitalist system based on predation, a few people owning, the masses fighting over land and resources, and it's the same exact system. It just spread, and the reason it spread was because it required men. And this didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years of generation on generation upon generation. It was a slow revolution. But it required men who were different, men who were capable of violence, who were disconnected from their feelings. The John Wayne kind of mentality, or the George Bush mentality. This kind of tough, we'll just do what we have to do. Disconnected from our feelings, and women who, again, began to be seen more and more as meat, as objects to be used and owned. So this spread to Europe. It spread to this country, and it's spreading around the world through McDonald's, through ConAgra, through marketing. And so this is what we're, I think, here on this planet to awaken from. The next revolution is a benevolent revolution, a powerful revolution where we begin again to see beings as beings and stop reducing them just to mere things. And that's when our real intelligence will begin to come back, because we have to forcefully disconnect from our deeper understandings, our intuition, and when we reduce these to things. It's very interesting, for example, to go to, I've done this, I've gone to science conferences where they have vivisectors talking about which animals they can harm. Some will say, I can work on mice, no problem, and cats, but I can't do dogs. Other ones say, I can do dogs, but I can't do monkeys. And others will say, I can't. Why do they draw? Where do you draw the line? Why? It's so interesting. What is it? So this is the thing I think we have to understand. And so early on, I have a chapter called The Nature of Intelligence, where I go into this very important thing to understand, and that is, I think if you look at any of the problems that we have as human beings, if you count them out, like I did a little while ago, like war, or terrorism, or disease, or hunger, or rape, or the breakdown of the family, or teenage pregnancy, or obesity, or I don't know, anything you can think of, we are doing it to animals. We are doing exactly that to animals. I mean, think of any problem, anything that we're kind of like struggling with. No one mentions this. No one ever says, well, hey, guess what? We're doing that to them. The most fundamental spiritual teaching of all the traditions is, whatever you would want most, give it to someone else. If you want to be happy, help others to be happy. If you want to be free, help others be free. If you want to be encouraged, encourage others. If you want to be loved, be loving. Well, if you want to be sick, make others sick. What we do, like obesity, for example. We have this obesity epidemic. Well, what do we do to animals? They are sold by the pound, right? I mean, the fatter they are, the more money they make. So these animals are fed special diets. They're fed a lot of actually meat. And you have cows and animals, basically vegetarian animals eating a lot of meat to fatten them up, and a lot of hormones, a lot of steroids, drugs, to make them fat. So we do that to them, and it happens to us. We force osteoporosis, for example, onto cows and chickens. All the calcium in the milk comes right out of their bones. These animals that are forced to give so much milk or lay so many eggs, they don't have any calcium in their bones. Their bones are completely brittle. That's why they have all these downers going to slaughterhouses, cows. Their bones are so brittle that they just break and they have to be dragged, to the killing floor. And we have osteoporosis, or living in more polluted environments. We force these animals to live in incredibly polluted environments. You go into a factory farm, you can't breathe. It's so noxious. The air, toxic water. We force them. There's a big issue now about water. Everything that we do to these animals. Terrorism, for example. You know, these animals are exposed to both chronic and acute fear and chronic and acute pain. And so they are in states of chronic and acute fear and pain and terror. We are terrorizing them by the millions, and terrorism stalks us, stalks the land. You know, and we see that anything that what women go through, the rape and these things, these animals are systematically, females are systematically abused sexually. The babies are always stolen from the mothers. The families are always destroyed. We talk about, we have this problem with the breakdown of the family. What are we doing to their families? Why it will always come back to us. I mean, it's so interesting to see, for example, that the electric prods that give shocks that are extremely painful to these animals to get them to move. There's now over 40 companies in the world making electric prods. And they're using them not only on animals, they're using a lot of them on human beings in the different prisons and torture places around the world. We do to them, and we end up doing it to each other, whatever it is. And this, I go into it in more depth here, but it's very ironic how things work out. And so we end up with, again, with the irony of the situation is that we end up, stabbing all these animals. And now if you go to a major metropolitan hospital, you'll find people, heart disease is such a rampant disease that there's actually assembly lines in these hospitals where they just line up, put 40, 50, 60 people a day through, double, triple, or quadruple heart bypass surgeries where they just stab them one after the other, pull up their arteries, change them. So as we stab, we get stabbed. It's this idea. So to understand that we are, the welfare of all of us is interconnected. As we bless others, we'll be blessed. As we curse others, we get cursed. And that animals really do matter. The thing is, animals cannot retaliate. So if I, like Jesus said the same thing, what good is it if you're kind to someone who's nice to you or is powerful? Because we know that all beings have interests. If you have a dog, it's not, you step on his or her tail, they don't like it, they yell and say, stop it, and so you learn to respect their interests. These animals, but, a pig, for example, is castrated with no anesthesia, whereas a veterinarian did that to a dog, they lose their license. And so it's not that they feel pain less, but it's just we care about their suffering less. So this abuse of their fundamental interests is the driving force behind our disconnection with what we're doing, not only what we're doing to them, but what we end up doing to each other. And so there's there's a whole chapter on the intelligence of human physiology, which, what always comes up is, well, what are humans supposed to eat? So I have a whole chapter on that. And we could talk a lot about that, but basically, it's very interesting to see. I'll just say basically this, and that is, when you look at our medical establishment, you'll see a huge establishment. I mean, it's gigantic. All the big pharmaceutical corporations, big medical corporations, there's literally hundreds of billions of dollars invested, massive, in hospitals and training, in pharmaceuticals and technology. And behind all that, there are huge financial institutions, banks, that are going to get their money back, that have loaned all the money to build all these things, okay? So you understand that. Now, how are they going to get paid back? The only way is you have to have a massive, reliable flood of sick people. You have to justify all this. How do you get a massive, reliable flood of sick people? You feed them, guess what? Toxic animal foods, because there's so much sickness in these foods, not only inherent in the studies by Colin Campbell, for example, that the optimal amount of animal protein for anyone to eat, health-wise, is 0. As soon as you start eating animal protein, the body is like having problems. But the way these animals are raised and really intensifies the toxins so much. I also have a whole chapter in here a little later called the metaphysics of food, which goes into, because it's not just the physical level, but there's also the metaphysical level. You're eating grief, fear, misery, and suffering. See, we live in a culture that reduces, and this reductionism makes us look at only the material level. Like if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. You know, so we've created a reductionistic science and a reductionistic religion. I have a whole chapter on that, based on this idea of reducing beings to things. And so for us to create a culture that doesn't reduce anymore, that sees the bigger picture, is going to require us at a very deep level to change this mentality that's at the living core of our culture. So there's a whole chapter on hunting and herding sea life, what we do to the oceans. This is really important, what we're doing to the oceans. Again, I won't go into too much detail, but it's very important. There's another chapter after that on the domination of the feminine, which is mostly about dairy and egg production, and really the underlying problems that we have at a deep level spiritually by dominating the feminine principle, not only dominating women, but dominating the feminine principle of life within all of us. It's so important to understand these things, I think. There's this, like I said, a chapter on the metaphysics of food. There's a whole chapter called Profiting from Destruction, which is on the environmental effects, which is really important to understand. With global warming, with the loss of water, loss of habitat, wilderness, it's amazing. Everywhere you look, it's the animal agribusiness that's the driving force behind the destruction, not only of the physical landscape, but of our psychological landscape, of our spiritual landscape. It's a massive pollution, really, of our joined mental environment. And then I have a chapter called Some Objections Answered, which is basically, all of us, when we understand this thing, then when we start talking to people, there's all these objections that people say. They'll say, well, plants have feelings too, or they'll say, well, the Indians are real spiritual and they ate meat, or they'll say, well, people have always eaten meat, so since we always did it, it must be right, or we're just built to eat meat or something. So anyway, I have all the possible objections anyone can come up with, I answer them. so you can kind of read that chapter. And then the last 3 chapters are much more positive. It's kind of a little intense in the middle, because I actually go into a little bit into some of the conditions that exist on factory farms and slaughterhouses. But then it gets more, I really try to end the last few chapters very positively, because I think it is basically a very positive situation. I mean, this is really incredibly good news, because instead of seeing that we're basically warlike, nasty people, it's really, the truth is, I think, much more clearly that we have been raised in a culture and forced, against our will, really, because our parents also were forced, and it's kind of come through the generations, to think of ourselves as essentially predatory, to reduce beings to things, and to create a whole order based on privilege, exclusion, domination, exploitation of other living beings. And we all live in that. I learned early on to make myself into an object, to try to sell myself on the market. We get disconnected from the beauty that we are and others are through the economic system and through the whole reductionistic system. Every institution carries this. I haven't done a very good job of explaining that, but the basic idea, I'll just briefly say it, is that every culture has institutions. And all of the institutions basically work in any culture to reproduce that culture. They just try to reproduce it. It's like, that's what a culture does. It tries to reproduce itself. So the core of the culture is this commodifying animals for food. And at the end of the day, we come home and we have some steak and some cheese, and that's the living core, and we practice that every day. To eat food, our connection with food. I have a whole thing in here about how sacred our connection with food is, which I haven't gone into, but trust me, it's so deep. So this is the living core of our culture. And I'm trying to think where I was going to go with that. The basic idea is then that if we question this fundamental viewing of animals for food, we become agents of transformation in the most positive way possible. Because this questioning of this living core creates within us the freedom to be the new revolution. And I think this is the thing that we're being called to more than anything else.